This is Edge of the Box, a podcast brought to you by WhoScored.com.
Hello, welcome to Edge of the Box, a podcast brought to you by WhoScored. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, and with me once more are football writer and author Jonathan Wilson and WhoScored.com's very own Martin Laurence. In this weekly podcast, we preview all of the upcoming weekend's Premier League action, covering every single match and assessing the top performers heading into game week 11 with a unique WhoScored slant. Hello, gentlemen. You both well?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. How are you?
Yep, very, very well. Martin?
Not too bad. Not quite recovered from last weekend, the controversy, but yeah, no, good.
I want to try and avoid doing a podcast that talks about VAR and refereeing. Quite frankly, it's driving me mad at the moment as a Villa fan. But we are going to start, Jonathan, this is for you, with the trivia aspect like we did last week. So I'm going to read you a relevant trivia question and you're going to spend the rest of the show thinking about it and hopefully come up with the answer at the end. So this week's question is, two of the players that started the last time Chelsea and Leeds met in 2004 are still playing in the Premier League today. Who are they? Now, I don't actually know the answers this week. I think I've got one of them. I think I know who one is, but the second one, I honestly don't have a clue. Any initial thoughts without giving any names away?
Yeah, I was hoping it was going to be a North London derby question. I was going to confidently say Emmanuel Adebayor, but sadly that's not the question. And,
I did have a few North London derby questions, but I thought they might follow the same sort of route and you might be able to get ahead of the game. So threw in a curveball.
Excellent curveball there, because as I say, I've got one, but absolutely no clue on the second one whatsoever. Just like last week,
they're still playing in the Premier League.
Yes.
Yeah, they're still at Premier clubs there.
And if that's false information, that's come from Martin, not me.
It's not false information.
We'll give Jonathan some time to think about it and we'll start previewing the Premier League's weekend action. Obviously, a game down this week, thanks to Newcastle and their COVID scare. Well, it's not even a COVID scare, is it? That the COVID issues around the club, Newcastle v Villa, has been cancelled, but there is 9 other games to get our teeth sank into. So there's only one place to start, really, isn't there? The North London derby. I mean, I can only see this going one way. But what are you thinking, Martin?
Yeah, it doesn't look good for Arsenal, does it? It's hard to sort of paint a positive picture about them at the moment. The way they played against Wolves up until the last sort of 10, 15 minutes when they just slung 33 crosses into the box, which Mikel Arteta was apparently quite proud of. I just thought that his comments on that were quite pertinent, just because they did smack a little bit of desperation for a coach, obviously, who's worked so much with Pep Guardiola, to be so sort of lauding the fact that they cross so many balls into the box, and the fact that if they keep doing that, it's pure maths that they will score more goals, was quite an alarming comment from Arteta. And yeah, like I said, it might just be a bit of a sign that it's quite desperate times for him. Particularly. So yeah, it's not a great fixture in general for away teams either in this one. So I think it's the last 12 league games there hasn't been an away win. The last player to score an away match winner was Thomas Rosicky inside 2 minutes in a 1-0 win at White Hart Lane. So a long time since there's been an away win. Obviously, the away sort of home away factor is a lot less meaningful this time around. So I guess that's what Arsenal will be hoping for from this. But it is, like you say, very hard to make much of a case for Arsenal to get a result in this one.
Yeah, Jonathan, what do you make of that? Because that's very Steve Bruce from Mikel Arteta, I'd say there. I mean, I'd argue swinging the ball in the box is no good with the players they've got.
Yeah, I mean, it actually reminded me of David Moyes' Manchester United in that game. Yeah. Was it at Fulham when they put in 82 crosses or whatever it was?
Yeah.
And you sort of think, well, it just feels a bit basic. It feels a bit sort of early 90s football. And, you know, if you've got something like Aubameyang, you know, why are you trying to use him like Niall Quinn? It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, that was a concern. I mean, the thing that struck me, you know, there's an oddity of this job that you quite often will go sort of 4 or 5 weeks without seeing a team live. You'll be watching 4 or 5 games a week, you know, for full 90 minutes, and you just catch up with the rest on highlights. And I certainly knew things weren't going great at Arsenal, but I hadn't actually seen a full 90 minutes of them for 4 or 5 weeks. And so I think the last game I'd seen them all the way through was the West Ham win, when they were actually pretty fortunate. And I'd still sort of just had in my head, oh, you know, they're doing all right, but they're not really scoring the goals. But they were really, really bad. And I guess they've been really bad against Villa as well. I hadn't quite appreciated how bad.
I mean, Villa were excellent, Jonathan. Absolutely excellent.
And I wrote a piece after that West Ham game, looking at what Arteta had done right, because that was very much a narrative at the time. That, you know, they'd had a very good end to the previous season. They obviously won the FA Cup, but they'd beaten Liverpool in the league, as well as getting the results against Chelsea and against Manchester City in the Cup. And I sort of thought, well, you know, they were pressing well. And then I looked at the stats, and actually their pressing's no different at all to what it was under Emery. If anything, it's slightly worse. And you sort of think, what's happened there? How's that gone wrong? That seems so contrary to everything we expected of Arteta as Guardiola's disciple, as everything he said when he came in. And I think there's probably been some kind of conscious attempt on his part to just sit off a little bit, maybe to, you know, recognising that the calendar is so congested this season, you can't press that sort of intensity. But the problem with that is they don't seem to have much else. Yeah, they don't have any creativity. Xhaka's form seems to have gone backwards. Ceballos has odd moments, but doesn't impose himself on games as it appeared he was. So I think hugely worrying times for Arsenal.
Yeah, I mean, their big summer signing, Thomas Partey as well, it seems to have gone missing with injury as well, which won't have helped things. But Jonathan, I watched Arsenal towards the back end of last season. I was actually really impressed with what I saw, and I thought they were heading in the right direction. You think they won the FA Cup, some of the goals they scored, it felt like every player was touching the ball in the lead. It was the goal, playing some really nice football. But it has gone back to being a bit like it was under Emre and a bit like it was under Wenger towards the end as well. And they just can't seem to get it right, can they?
Yeah, I mean, what I liked about them towards the end of last season was there was a very clear and actually quite high-risk plan that they sat quite deep because they knew they had great pace going forwards. So sit deep, bring the opposition onto you, pass it about at the back. Obviously, there's a danger you might give a ball away, you might concede a goal, but then hit those long diagonals out to the left for Aubameyang, and that worked for them again and again and again. It worked for them against City in the Cup, it worked for them against Chelsea in the Cup. And you sort of assumed that would continue. And I was expecting them to be like that against Leeds. It seemed the obvious thing for them to do against Leeds was to attack that weak right side, which we'd seen Palace and Leicester exploit. You know, playing balls in behind Luke Ayling for Aubameyang. But somehow the discussion about where Aubameyang should play had superseded what appeared a very obvious tactic. And he was playing in the middle. And I've never quite understood this obsession with Aubameyang playing through the centre. I think he's really good at coming in from the left. And it feels like the old-fashioned idea that your best goal scorer has to play centrally. You know, you look at Liverpool, and Mane and Salah play wide, cutting in. And I think for 20 years, that's now been a totally valid way of playing, of using your centre forward to create space. And then you're actually hitting that space around the box from positions that are harder for a defence to pick up. And I remember when Alex Ferguson moved Wayne Rooney to play wide with Ronaldo going through the middle in European games in 2007-8. And a really interesting interview he gave. And he often would avoid talking about tactics, about football. But specifically saying he'd sort of come around to this idea that you play your goal scorer wide because he's then attacking on a diagonal. It actually gives him more acceleration room, gives him more space. He's often attacking the weaker foot of the fullback, and he's just hitting that channel between the centre-back and the fullback, which is naturally, in any back four, that's always going to be a slightly weak area. That's where the join is, so that's where you try and hit. So I don't get the Arsenal obsession with trying to play Aubameyang through the middle. I don't think he particularly has demanded to do that, and even if he has, his record playing from wide is so good. You just say, no, play wide.
Yeah, I mean, that smacks of changing something that's working. He scored so many goals from the left last season. I mean, another example, Raheem Sterling, who's arguably been Man City's biggest goal scorer over the last few years. He's played a lot of games from the left as well. As you say, they don't necessarily have to play through the middle. Just on Aubameyang, Martin, it's going to be late. It's going to be lazy. A lot of people say it's not necessarily something I think, but the downturn in form, people are going to look at the big, long-term, big money contract, aren't they?
They are, and as much as it is, obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, and you can say, oh look, that's not paid off at all. Obviously it's still relatively early days, but there was always going to be a risk in paying a 31-year-old £250,000 a week or whatever it is, and that's without bonuses. Obviously, I don't really think he's going to be getting many bonuses at the moment without scoring goals and winning games. But there was a risk to that. I don't think Arsenal felt that they had a choice, and you can understand that. I don't think you can criticise the decision too much, other than the fact that it is an aging player, and you have to think of it. You're going to be paying £250,000 a week minimum to a player who's 33, 34, and you're relying on that player to remain an elite goal scorer for at least 2 years of that contract. And obviously, this current spell, he's far from an elite goal scorer. He's obviously scored 1 goal since he signed his contract in the league, and that was a penalty. But I completely agree in terms of the sort of shifting into the middle. I think that was perhaps a sign that Arteta was he just started to listen to the fans, to listen to that sort of reasoning, and I don't think there was much reasoning behind it. I think, like you say, a lot of people might think, oh, the striker's going to score more goals. But you look across the league, even Timo Werner, people expected him to come straight up front, replace Tammy Abraham. But he's played on the left, and he's another quick player who, like Jonathan says, has that room to accelerate into. And he's getting hatfuls of chances, like really, really good chances. I think there's an issue with Aubameyang, obviously, in terms of his confidence. And he's not getting into the box. He's just not getting as high up the pitch as he was. And people might say, oh, his touches in the opposition box are low because he plays on the wing or he plays on the left. But it's just not true at all. The top 5 players in the league for opposition touches in the opposition box per game are all wingers, or wide forwards, I should say. Aubameyang's off 3.7 per game at the moment. And the top 3, which is Salah, Grealish, Sterling, and then it's Mane and Richarlison, the top 5. The top 3 are all averaging twice as many touches in the opposition box as Aubameyang. I think the issue when you put so much faith and rely so heavily on a player who he's got plenty of talents, don't get me wrong, but he is essentially just a world-class finisher. When that person stops finishing, there becomes an issue in people. It becomes more stark, the fact that his goal drive has stopped because he used to score so many goals, and it becomes more stark that he's not performing well because he's not offering anything else to the team. So his dribbles have halved. And I think importantly as well, his tackles and interceptions per game combined have halved as well. And people say, oh, that's not what he's there for. But if you're not scoring goals, people will want to see you putting in a shift. And they're not seeing that from Aubameyang at the moment. And I think that's where the questions will come in about the sort of he's cashing in on his new contract. I don't think it's fair just yet, but obviously a lot of people will point to Ozil you've got there on massive wages. And is Aubameyang going to follow suit? I don't think he is. And I'm pretty sure he'll get going again. But that was a risk to pay that contract. But again, I don't think Arsenal felt like they had a choice.
I think there are two things to pick up on there. So, first of all, the fact he's not making the interceptions and tackles now, is that to do with his attitude, or is it to do with this slightly more reserved way of playing that Arsenal seem to have adopted? I mean, which is chicken, which is egg? I mean, they clearly somehow fit together. But the second thing is to do with Arsenal's recruitment. Their 4 most expensive players in terms of transfer fee. Ozil, who's just not playing, he's not there. And then that front 3 of Aubameyang, Lacazette, and Pepe. How did they think those 3 were going to play together? Aubameyang coming from the left, cutting onto his right foot, going into that central space. Pepe, left-footed, plays on the right, wants to do the same thing. Great. But you then need a centre forward who drops deep. Lacazette isn't that player. Lacazette's a traditional number 9 who has learned to do that to an extent, but it's not his natural game. And then if you had Ozil there as well, he's in that space the centre forward would drop into. So their 4 biggest signings, I find it almost impossible to see how any more than 2 of them could ever fit together in the same team.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolute mess, essentially, isn't it? I mean, Nketiah, who's coming through as well, he's not really that type of striker either. He's more of a fox in the box type, if you will. Jonathan, what do you think of the Ozil situation? Because, like you say, it doesn't make sense for him to be in the team at the moment, the way they're set up. But for him not to be in the 25-man squad, I feel like there's a dearth of creativity in that Arsenal squad, and he'd make a difference at the very least off the bench, especially for the money he's on as well. Yeah,
I know what you mean. I quite admire Arteta for coming in and saying, no, this is the way we're going to do things. And I'm afraid that Ozil, with his characteristics and perhaps also his attitude, that has no place here. So I don't really have a problem with that from an Arteta point of view. I think the failure of the club to move him on is really bizarre. And I think from Ozil's point of view as well, he can feel pretty let down by the club, particularly given his comments over the weekend and how that seemed to be treated by the club. And those are comments I think he has every right to make. So I think there's been failures all around there, of which Arteta is probably the least of them. And I can see how by bringing him back, even if Ozil's not sort of overtly disruptive, even if he's just this sort of figure who, well, he didn't fit, we were told he wasn't part of the future, and suddenly he's back to get us out of the hole, I can see how that feels like a failure of leadership. It feels like a step back in the Arteta revolution. So it's obviously not right, it's not great, but I can see it from Arteta's point of view.
I mean, I'm desperately trying to think of a situation where someone's come back in after a similar situation. And I can't think of one. The closest I've got is Tevez, but it was different, wasn't it?
Well, Steve McClaren tried to do it with Beckham. When Steve McClaren replaced Eriksson as England manager, he made a big point of dropping Beckham. And then that game against Croatia at Wembley, Beckham's been. I mean, I think Beckham had been injured, and he was dragged back. He's chucked on for the second half, just get some crosses in the box and hope that a free kick or something would come off. But I mean, that smacked of desperation. It smacked of weak leadership. Not so much to bring him back, but the dropping him in the first place. I think if you do that, you've got to sort of follow through with it.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, that wasn't the only concern in Steve McClaren's reign, but yeah, I completely get what you mean. Martin, let's move on to Spurs a little bit now. I mean, I did my best to try and railroad this podcast and make it the Jose Mourinho podcast last week, but again, he's gone and pulled off a masterclass last weekend at Chelsea. A good result for Spurs, really, isn't it, that one?
Yeah, it was a good result. I think there was a significant drop off in terms of performance and in terms of how that system worked against Chelsea compared to City, but I think that was mainly down to Chelsea rather than down to Tottenham. Lampard proved in the game against Manchester United that he perhaps has learnt a little bit from Jose in that he's willing to be a little bit more pragmatic, and Chelsea weren't sort of attacking Tottenham as they have been other teams, understandably. And I think it was another case like the Man U game where neither team wanted to lose. So it was a good result probably for both teams, to be honest. Certainly for Tottenham. But yeah, like I say, I don't think they got into the same rhythm, and I think that was partly because obviously they scored so early against Man City, and that's perfect for Mourinho playing into his sort of tactical system. So yeah, it was a very, very good result. I wasn't overly impressed by the game as a spectacle, obviously. I don't think anyone was. But a good result, and a show of the fact that Jose Mourinho's adapted. Obviously, he did the exact same thing with the two sort of deeper central midfielders dropping in between the centre halves and the fullbacks, and it closed off those lines. Obviously, like I said, that Werner's been picking up so frequently. So yeah, I think this will be a really interesting game in terms of how Mourinho approaches it, because Arsenal aren't the Arsenal of old. Tottenham will be expected as the home team, even though there's sort of few fans, to be on the front foot to an extent. I don't think they will necessarily. I think they'll probably be a little bit more adventurous, just given the fact that Arsenal aren't posing anybody many problems at the moment. Arsenal, we did a stat in the week actually that Arsenal they haven't managed more shots per game than any of the bottom teams in Europe's top 5 leagues. So that's Sheffield United, Crotone, Huesca, Schalke and Dijon, I believe. They haven't managed more shots per game than any of them, which is a massive concern, obviously, for Arsenal. And I don't think Tottenham have much to fear from a defensive side. So they do need to sort of try and instigate things on the attack a little more this time. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach it. I know Mourinho suggested that Kane is a doubt. Who knows? With Mourinho, Reguilon the same, and Vinicius, I think. So I think he's trying to say, look, both of our strikers might be out here. But you never know with Jose Mourinho.
Yeah, if you look at as they were in the last season, you would think this could be another very cagey game, that they would try and sit deep, they'd try and draw Tottenham onto them, and Tottenham would be trying to resist that, and there'd be a very, very sort of cautious battle of two teams lying deep, with Arsenal trying to hit those long diagonals to Aubameyang. But Arsenal aren't that side now, so you just sort of think Tottenham are going to dominate midfield. There's no way they can't dominate midfield. And that then does raise issues for Tottenham, because that's not the way they've been playing. The way they've been scoring the goals is hitting sides on the break, with Kane dropping deep, with runners going beyond him. And they're very unlikely to have that space. So I think it is an interesting test for Tottenham. It is a test of whether they can face let's be generous and say, a mid-table side, and who are likely to sit deep and find a goal from that. And if they can't do that, then they don't really have a title challenge. If they can do that, then great.
Because if I think about some of the games where Tottenham have dropped points, I think Newcastle at home, I think West Ham at home when they were 3-0 up as well. If they were going to drop points, Jonathan, so far this season, it has been, I mean, it's very harsh on Arsenal, but it has been against these kind of sides. Yeah,
I mean, to be fair, both of those games were pretty weird games. Both the Newcastle and the West Ham games, they were totally dominant for, 80 minutes against West Ham and 93 minutes against Newcastle to the weird penalty. And Steve Bruce's strange magic that allows him to steal points in the final minute. So those two games wouldn't, although they didn't win them, it wouldn't worry me particularly as a Tottenham fan. I think this is a tougher test than either of those two games.
Fair enough. Good point. And now I'm going to hand over to Martin a little bit here, because we have got the combined Spurs and Arsenal 11. But last week, Jonathan, there was some serious discontent in the camp here, arguing about the formation. Why are we playing 4-4-2 with these teams? And Martin, you've been flexible, to be fair. You've made it count.
Yeah, I've responded. I've buckled at that weak leadership, I think Jonathan would call it. I've not stuck by my guns. But yeah, we've put together a team this time that is in a 3-5-2. So yeah, more like a system that certainly Arsenal have played this season, or similar to, with a back three. And this is obviously our strongest team based on who scored ratings this season alone in the Premier League. So
Jonathan, I'll come to you. Any guesses who the goalkeeper might be so far this season based on stats?
It's got to be Lloris, surely.
Yeah, I mean, I've no idea how comfortable it is, but yeah, it's Lloris.
In terms of comfort, yeah, he's a little way ahead. Leno generally performs pretty well in our stats, and certainly last season, which I thought was fair. I thought he had a good season last season up until he got injured, which was why the whole sort of Martinez, who do we go with as our number one? I think it was reasonable to stick with Leno just because he had a really good season up to that point. Not been quite so good this season. Again, he's not been awful, but there's been a couple of shaky moments. So Lloris gets the nod in goal. Yes, and it is again a similar case of one team, and probably the one you'd expect this time, dominating the team again.
Yeah, I'm going to give Lloris the captaincy as well, which I'm not sure I've got the jurisdiction to do that, but that is what I'm going to do. We've got a back three then, Jonathan. I'll give you the first one. It's Gabriel. In a dark season so far for Arsenal, he has really been a shining light, hasn't he? Yeah,
I mean, he's. I think we were talking about him last week as being one of the best signings of the summer, and I think that's just true. He has looked a proper modern defender in a team that have often struggled to sign centre backs. He's a very good one. So yeah, he would have been, I think, probably despite Tottenham having the best defensive record in the Premier League this season. I think, were I picking this and we're not using the stats, Gabriel would have been my first centre back in there.
That's good, because he is the highest rated of the three, so that's a plus.
It's a very Spurs-centric end to the back three. So he's got Alderweireld and Eric Dyer on the left of the back three. I don't really like a right footer on the left of the back three, Martin, but I'm imagining I don't think there is. I can't think of a left footer you could have put there.
I wasn't too sort of being too rigid in that. Obviously, I think you'd have Dyer in the middle, and I think Gabriel plays on the left of the sort of back four, or when it's a back four for Arsenal, he plays on the left side. So you'd probably put him there and Dyer in the middle.
What have you made of Eric Dyer so far this season? Because he was falling away a little bit at Spurs, but Mourinho's reinvigorated him, really, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those players who I think there's something about the way he runs. He looks not entirely like a footballer, and that means that when things go wrong, they tend to look worse for him than they would do for other players. And I think we've seen that with England as well. But it seems to me now that he's pretty much nailed on for England to play as the centre of the three, unless Conor Cody suddenly does really, really well before the Euros, and he, I guess, could come into that role. And you think of the game against Belgium when he gave away that penalty a bit clumsily, and that sort of bad Eric Dyer. But actually, there's a lot of good Eric Dyer that I think he's good on the ball for all his slightly sort of cumbersome way of moving. He is actually a decent footballer. Maybe lacks a bit of pace, but in a back three, he can get away with that. So you can't fault him in the air. I think his reading of the game, his positioning is very good.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, he showed an excellent turn of pace when he was chasing after a support in the stand last season. That's probably one of the quickest times I've ever seen him move. We move on to in front of the back three now. So the right wing back is Serge Aurier. Jonathan, I'm surprised by that. Looking at that, but I mean, you're saying about, obviously, as people who talk about football, you don't watch every game, but I feel like I've seen pretty much every Spurs game, and obviously Doherty's played a fair few games. I'll come to Martin, actually, because Martin's picked the side. What's the reasoning for Aurier being in? And how many games has he played compared to Doherty? Because I feel like Doherty's played more.
Yeah, Doherty's played slightly more. I don't think Doherty's been that convincing. On and off, he's played well, and I think he struggled, certainly on his debut, up against Richarlison. He had a real tough time. I think Aurier is an interesting one just because he's not the most popular player with the Tottenham fans, and I can understand why. But under Mourinho, he's undoubtedly been a really, really important player to Tottenham. Certainly last season, where obviously they didn't have Reguilon and they didn't have that balance that they do now. There was so much onus on Serge Aurier to be the sort of attacking outlet from wide. And I thought he did that pretty well. He got in the box a lot. He got very high up the pitch, and he was important to them. So I thought certainly under Mourinho, he's come on, and I think he's sort of maybe won back some of the Tottenham fans with his performances. He always gives 100%. He's a bit erratic for sure, and sometimes he will have a stinker, but he hasn't had too many recently. And I thought he played really, really well against Chelsea. He got a very good rating from us in that game. Gets through a lot of defensive work. I think that's partly down to the fact that some people do see him as a weakness and they target that side. But in general, I think he stood up to it under Mourinho for the most part. So I think, like you say, when Doherty was signed, or Doherty, when he was signed, many people just thought that's it for Aurier, he's done. But he stood up to it and he's fought back. And I don't have any doubt that he'll start against Arsenal because he was very good against Chelsea, and Doherty will probably start tonight as we are Thursday. So yeah, I think it's justified based on this season and probably even rolling back into last season under Mourinho.
It's Jonathan. I get the impression that Aurier is the pick by Jose for the big games, the games they have to win against the big boys, and then Doherty kind of plays the rest. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, I think so. I think his role has changed slightly this season. I think Mourinho likes one of his wing backs to be more attacking than the other, and last season that tended to be on the right. And I think that's probably why Doherty was signed. That there's a perception that he's probably the best attacking right back in the league who was realistically available to Tottenham. But Aurier, actually, his form towards the end of last season I thought was really good. And in that slightly more defensive role this season, because Reguilon's doing the attacking on the left side, I think Aurier probably, weirdly, is the better defensive player, despite this sort of sense that chaos is only ever a fraction away with him.
Yeah, and we've got Højbjerg, Ceballos, and Ndombele make up the midfield three. Reguilon's the left back. I think that probably spoke for itself, and we spoke quite a lot about him last week. But Jonathan, Ndombele, again, a big turnaround. He was out in the cold last season. Didn't look like it was going to work out for him at Spurs, but he's come in this season, worked hard, and Mourinho's seen something he really likes in him now.
Yeah, and I think he's actually a really fascinating case study. That there was this perception, and I sort of went along with this as well. I'm not exempting myself from this at all. That Mourinho, partly the tactics had passed him by, but also that life had passed him by. That he was no longer able to have the same sort of relationship with players that he did back at Porto, at Chelsea the first time round. And when I did the book on the Barcelona legacy on Mourinho and Guardiola and how they've sort of influenced football and how their battle sort of represents the sort of tactical developments of the last 20 years, I spoke to a lot of players in that Porto team, and it was like speaking to cult members. It was incredible. They just sort of, none of them had a single bad word to say about Mourinho, and they all seemed to regard him as this sort of, I don't know, some kind of guru or sage who could almost see the future. And you sort of thought, well, he's never had that relationship with players at Real Madrid or at Manchester United. But I now think actually it's a stature of the club. It's not a generational issue that players playing for Real Madrid and Manchester United, they they don't want the tough love that you get from Mourinho. And I think the way he's worked with Ndombele shows his methods do still work. The last season, Ndombele, as you say, was frozen out. They had that slightly weird public training session during the first lockdown. And now Ndombele seems to be a major part of that midfield. And he's a great player to watch because, again, a bit like Dyer, he doesn't really look like a footballer. It's like he's got, I don't know, I don't know if he's got too many limbs or if his limbs are slightly too long. Mm. And he often seems to sort of bundle forward and the ball will be sort of 6 feet behind him. And then suddenly he's got it under control again. But yeah, he's in a midfield that isn't particularly creative. He does give them that element of unpredictability.
Yeah, he's so interesting to watch. I can't think of another central midfield player like him, although in our system that we've got here, I think he'd be playing a little bit more advanced. And Jonathan, mine really has took the shackles off this way. We've still got a front two, despite the change of formation. It's Kane and Son up front. You'd be surprised to learn Aubameyang hasn't got in. Well,
yeah, I mean, if it were a front three, which is what I'd have picked, but anyway, let's leave that. I would probably have dropped Ceballos and then brought some in on the right who, I guess, Lucas Moura, Bergwijn.
That was our struggle, just because obviously these are based on our ratings, obviously, and neither of the, I think where those two players have been in and out and made a few sub appearances each, their ratings are affected a little bit by that. So they didn't have great ratings, and obviously the option from Arsenal is Willian, who has had a very indifferent start. Let's say he's not won over the Arsenal fans whatsoever. After a decent debut, he's gone very, very cold. So yeah, that was our predicament there. So there was a better rating in central midfield than there was from the right wing, hence the formation this time.
Yeah, I mean, Son running beyond Kane has worked really, really well. I guess if you play Ndombele to the right of the midfield three, he can make those runs forward to the right of Kane, so Son can still play slightly to the left. So yeah, I think we'll work towards a compromise that can work there.
There we go. Jonathan's coach. Jonathan's the coach. He's in charge of the tactics for sure. He'll get the best.
I'm starting to feel a little bit sorry. I'm starting to feel a little bit sorry for you, to be fair, Mike. Obviously, the only one that works directly for Who Scored. I feel like you're getting a bit of an interrogation with these teams every week, but you've justified it to us, and I think we're both happy with it in the end. Jonathan, based on ability alone and not taking into account stats, is there anything you'd really change? I've got to say, I've struggled to see much that you can change there.
Yeah, I mean, if it is a front two, that front two picks itself. The midfield, Ceballos, I have a slight query over, but then I'm not sure if there's anybody obvious to come in to replace him. The two wing backs are pretty obvious. And both goalkeepers have had decent seasons, but Lloris is the better keeper. So I'm relatively happy with this. More happy than I was last week, anyway.
A victory for Who Scored.
Yep. I suppose Sissoko could have come in for Ceballos if we're being picky, but it's based on stats. But I was surprised to see Ceballos in there as well.
And he does give you a bit more bite. And the only thing I'd say about Sissoko, having seen him a lot playing for Newcastle against Sunderland, is he really doesn't like the derby.
He's not good in a derby situation.
See, that's what
he was Sunderland fans' favourite player for years. He could be relied upon to play well in the weeks leading up to the derby, so you get picked, then you just disappear completely. Perfect player.
See, I knew that. I knew that. That's why I didn't go for him.
Yeah, well, we'll be back with that feature again next week. I really enjoy that feature. I'm going to be perfectly honest. It's something I really, really like. We now move on to game 2, which is West Ham v Man United. And Martin, I'll start with you because you're probably still as fuming as me. West Ham won on Monday, move up to 5th in one of the luckiest performances I've ever seen. But let's not take anything away from West Ham because they're doing really, really well, aren't they?
They are. I said it at the time. They basically looked like scoring for 2 minutes and scored in both of them, which is clinical. That's fair enough. And Villa didn't defend those situations well enough. But David Moyes was certainly not happy with the level of performance compared to what he has been seeing. So yeah, I think that it was a fortunate result for them. But again, when you win games and play badly, that's never a bad thing. So they come into this one with obviously a really, really strong record after 10 games. It's been a very tough start to the season for West Ham, and many people probably thought they'd probably be in the bottom 3 at this point. So to be 5th is pretty remarkable. And I think they've offered Moyes a new contract, which you have to say is justified based on what he's done there twice almost to a certain extent. So yeah, I think he deserves a lot of credit. This is the second best start to the season after 10 games they've ever had in the Premier League. The best was 5 years ago now, when they got 20 points after 10 games. They got 17 this time. But just a point that after those 10 games 5 years ago, they went 8 games without a win. So let's hope that doesn't happen for West Ham fans. Interesting, the 11th game in that run was against Watford, and 2 goals from Odion Ighalo ended their strong start. So maybe he's a rogue pick for your fantasy football teams this week with with Rashford going off in midweek, and obviously you've got the situation with Cavani, which is still unresolved as far as I understand at the moment. So yeah, I say that in jest, obviously, but yeah, it'll be an interesting game. I think the one thing I didn't like about the West Ham sort of team selection, as it were, was to drop Sebastian Haller. I thought was very, very harsh for a player who's obviously struggled to sort of stamp his authority on the team, but to have scored a very good goal, a match-winning goal the week previous, built his confidence up. He scored in the international break. I understand Antonio's a hugely important player for West Ham, but for him to come back in when he clearly wasn't fit, he wasn't match fit. He didn't sprint after balls, and West Ham will have known that he wasn't sprinting, so he clearly wasn't match fit. So I thought that was quite poor form. Obviously, it paid off to an extent, but they took him off at half time. So it'll be interesting to see who plays that game, because Antonio wasn't fit and he didn't play well. He just stood there with his shorts pulled up like hot pants and did nothing. It's a slight grievance of mine. Not a fan of that. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see who starts up front for West Ham. Interesting to see if Benrahma gets a chance. Obviously, he had the instant impact against Aston Villa. Didn't really feature much after that, but yeah, some interesting selections to be made in the front three for West Ham.
Yeah, and Jonathan, before Martin character assassinated his striker selection, I was going to give Moyes some big praise, because it feels very much like he's back, and there is a little bit of a shade of his Everton side with West Ham now, isn't there? I said he's in you, and I thought he doesn't agree with that, but I still
yeah, they've had a much better start than I expected. I thought they were really fortunate not to get relegated last season. I thought they were pretty poor for much of the final weeks of the season, and got that result against Chelsea, obviously, which was huge for them. I know they won the last 3 games. I'm not sure they played as well in those 3 games they did in the 3 before that, when they didn't win any of them. The Fulham game, okay, but they were lucky against Sheffield United, very lucky against Villa. So things are falling for them, which is good. I mean, I think West Ham fans would say they've probably been due some luck in the last 5 years. But they did play really well. The 3-0 win over Leicester obviously was a great performance, and then to get back in the game against Tottenham, they were very good against City as well, and could have won that, which they drew. A little bit unlucky to lose at Liverpool. So there is some sort of balance there. They do just about deserve to be where they are. I have severe reservations about how sustainable this is, and my big doubt about Moyes, and I think you saw it in the Villa game, as we've seen it many times before. And again, I say this slightly with a Sunderland hat on. I saw it a lot at Sunderland, that his substitutions are always negative. And there was a stat, I think, up until the Tottenham game, the 3-3, not a single time in his reign at West Ham had the result improved after his first substitution. And yeah. I mean, I say we saw this a lot at Sunderland. We didn't see this a lot at Sunderland because Sunderland weren't ahead very often. But the number of times they conceded goals in the last 10 or 15 minutes, largely by going into the bunker, retreating. And I remember a game actually at West Ham. Awful game of football. It was 0-0, but Sunderland were kind of quite comfortable at 0-0. And then I think took off Paddy McNair and took off Stephen Pienaar and brought on Paddy McNair, dropped deeper and deeper, and Winston Reid scored in the 4th minute of injury time. And you just sort of thought, well, you could see that coming a mile off because it happens every week. So that's my big concern about Moyes is that, does he affect games possibly with substitutions? I don't think he does. and he seems quite happy to defend in that old-fashioned way of just dropping into the edge of the box and sort of just hoping that there's sort of the bullets bounce off the defensive shields. And on Monday they did, but I wouldn't rely on that happening regularly.
Martin, Jonathan talks about that old-fashioned way of defending. One thing that struck me on Monday was it's just the sheer size of them. I mean, Villa are quite a small side in general, but West Ham, they've got so many tall players, good in the air, dangerous from set plays. They'll defend set play as well. It's a bit of a throwback, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's maybe where you were getting at in terms of turning them into sort of an Everton of old, and that he does like big, strong players, and he's got plenty of them. And obviously, there's been the comparisons with Souček and Fellaini, which I think are fair to an extent. So yeah, there was a big difference against Villa. They've got the back three in place. They've got Balbuena and Ogbonna, obviously the sort of big guys in the back three. Aaron Cresswell, there's obviously a fullback playing very well in on the left of the back three. But yeah, they've got power as much as size. They've got real power. Even someone like Bowen, he's a very sort of heavy set, sort of low center of gravity, but he's a powerful player, and that's what David Moyes has always valued. So that is one of their strongest sort of strings to their bow, as it were, and is essentially important in every game that they play with Rice and Souček just basically fighting fires in the middle of the pitch. So yeah, it'll be a physical battle whenever you come up against West Ham. And I think they'll be, obviously Moyes will be really up for this game against Manchester United. They've actually won their last two at home against Manchester United, and they haven't won 3 in a row at home against Manchester United since 1976, I believe, when they actually went on to win 4 in a row. So a chance to not make history, but to put a few wrongs right in the fans' minds. And I think this is a really will be a tough test for Man United after the sort of exertions they had in midweek, for sure, to come up against like you say, a physical side straight away. They'll have to stand up to that, and we'll see how they get on.
Yeah, because we've talked about throwbacks, Jonathan. I mean, it was a bit of a Fergie-esque throwback last week. Man U beating Southampton 3-2, 2-0 down, scoring in Fergie time and go on to win the game. But then, as Martin's just alluded to, back down to earth with a bump, losing to Paris last night.
Yeah, and the thing we said about that Southampton game in advance of it was Solskjaer's teams tend to be better against teams who press them, teams who leave space in behind them. And Southampton did that. And even though they were 2-0 up at half-time, they never really, I suppose, was having gone ahead, they had a shot that hit the post from the fullback, Kyle Walker-Peters. And so United did lose discipline slightly. But on the balance of play, it wasn't sort of 2-0 at half-time. It was a huge surprise that United came back. West Ham won't leave that space behind them. And I think even PSG, if you compare the two games this season in the Champions League, the game in Paris, PSG were coming out, they're leaving space in behind them, which United exploited. This time, PSG, so the Champions League have been sitting much deeper recently. They did that against Leipzig twice. They did it again on Wednesday. And United struggled to create those chances. So I think this will be hard for United, just because that space isn't going to be there behind the West Ham defence. And if they put balls in the boxes, as we said, West Ham are very good defensively, and they're big and physical, and it's hard to see United prospering from that.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, at the time of filming, as Martin said, we don't really know what's going on with Cavani, but he made an unbelievable impact when he came on last week. Such a poacher. I don't know whether you saw the game last night fully, but his lob off the bar, I was egging that to go in. It would have been such a sensational goal. It's good to see an old-fashioned goal scorer doing well. Oh,
he's a wonderful footballer. Really, I've always enjoyed watching him play. He's somebody with great energy, great movement, great finishing. As you say, quite an old-fashioned style of player, but I think with the brain to accommodate himself to the modern game. I think being the centre forward of PSG is one of the, is a really sort of thank task. Given Neymar and Mbappe sort of real roost there, so to do it as effectively as he did, and with as few sort of flashpoints as there were, I think that speaks well to him as a person, as somebody who can understand the dynamic of the dressing room, and also somebody who can accommodate himself tactically to those around him. So, we don't know quite whether he's going to be available or not, but he is a fantastic player, whatever else happens.
Yeah, and Martin, I was watching Man U last night, and McTominay and Fred obviously seem to start the big games, as Gary Neville always says in commentary. Solskjaer likes the stability that those two bring. But I was just thinking, in years gone by, those two, I don't know whether I'm being harsh, but they'd be squad players. They wouldn't be the ones that come in and start on the big games. I just wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think that's fair to an extent. I think they, like you say, they both do a job. But to be fair, I think you can look at players at Manchester United over the years under Ferguson who maybe didn't get much respect or the sort of the adulation that they sort of deserve to a lesser extent in the form of like Carrick and Fletcher, John O'Shea to a lesser extent. But there were players there that played very regularly and did play in big games that did a job. So I think Ferguson was very open to that. And I think that's probably something that Solskjaer's sort of learnt from him, having played under him for so long, that you do need those players who are going to do the dirty job. And obviously Fred did the dirty job a little bit too well last night and probably could have had about 4 red cards. But yeah, I completely understand what you mean. They're not glamorous players whatsoever. I think Fred's done well. Another player who's probably done well to sort of salvage his reputation, because he had a very tough start. It's hard to see what he offered initially, but playing a lot deeper now, and he does a job. Didn't do it well at all in midweek in terms of keeping his composure, and that decision to keep him on, I think everyone thought that was a bit of an odd one. But it was just another show of faith in him, that Solskjaer trusts him to do a job without going over the top, and obviously got it wrong in midweek. But both very solid players, and I think if you've got the players around them that Manchester United do that don't, I think Fernandes is actually excellent in terms of his work rate and stuff like that, but maybe Rashford to slightly less, and certainly Martial. And I think that's where it's been such a joy to see Cavani play so well. He's such a sort of quite a contrast to Martial in terms of his attitude. I'm not saying Martial doesn't work hard, because I think he does, but I think he's just got this mannerism about him where he looks like a child who's been sort of refused a treat. Having a child myself who gets refused a lot of treats, so that's the exact face that he pulls all the time. Even after he scores, he's so mardy. You just want to tell him to cheer up. And Cavani has that face where he's quiet, but he just looks aggressive. He looks fired up. A lot of the time, Martial just looks miffed. It reminds me of Jordan Ayew, who has a face like a smacked arse all the time, basically. But yeah, so it's been nice to see Cavani sort of offset in that way. And Martial's obviously having a tough time at the moment. So if Cavani is available, I'd expect him to start. And yeah, I think Martial's an interesting talking point at the moment, because he was excellent post-lockdown last season. He was so good, looked so confident, and it's really drained out of him at the moment. He had that awful miss last night. So interesting sort of selection issues at sort of the top end of the pitch for both teams.
Yeah, I mean, it may be time for a facial expressions section in the Who Scored website now, Martin, because that seems like a way to judge a player now as well from what you've just said. We move on now to just a minute, where Jonathan and Martin pick out the remaining games in the Premier League and have just a minute to go over them and tell us what to expect. So, Jonathan, I'm going to start with you. Burnley v Everton.
Hang on, sorry, let me just start the clock. Burnley, obviously their problem is scoring goals. They've only got 3 in the 9 games so far. Everton, after that really good start, they've only had 1 win in the last 6. I think Hammers has become a real problem for them, having looked such a creative spark. I think partly the injuries to Seamus Coleman hasn't helped it. They seem to have a very good relationship on that right-hand side, but the lack of defensive work Hammers does has become a problem. And that's led to Everton changing shape. I have to say, I'm not convinced by Iwobi as a wing back. And of course, that's now compounded by Luka Dean being out as well. So they've lost the 2 first-choice fullbacks. They're trying to cobble together wing backs. I think that is a problem. Nick Pope should be back for Burnley, which is clearly a big thing. And I think this is sort of a game that Burnley, against a side that I don't want to call them soft, but has weaknesses in midfield, the sort of game Burnley have to win if they are going to get out of this trouble.
I think I'll back you up there. I quite fancy Burnley for that one. Martin now, Man City v Fulham. Off you go.
So I think this is a similar game for City in terms of the Burnley one, in the fact that their record in this fixture is quite remarkable. Obviously, I managed to tip a much closer game last week and another 5-0, so that went down well. But I think this is a similar sort of case in that City have actually scored 19 unanswered goals in this fixture at the Etihad. So they've won 6 in a row without conceding in that time since Damien Duff last scored for Fulham in 2011. It'll be interesting again. Another sort of decision to make up front. Aguero's coming back to fitness, but will probably miss this game again. Ferran Torres started ahead of Jesus in midweek, and while he was quiet, he's been an excellent signing in general. He's now scored in every competition he's played this season after he scored against Burnley last weekend. He scored 10 times for club and country, so that's proven to be an excellent signing. On the contrary, Raheem Sterling has now failed to score in his last 6, so it'd be interesting to see what Pep goes with up front. After 4 straight defeats to start the season, saw everyone understandably write off Fulham. Scott Parker deserves credit for his side's revival. They now rank 10th in the form table over the last 6 games with 7 points, and have only failed to score in one of those. So I am going to put my neck on the line again and say that Fulham will score, but a heavy win for City.
I was just about to cut you off because that's the first time I've ever remembered to look at what time you started.
What was the time?
Your minute was well gone.
Was that long? Oh, wow.
Into 1 minute 30 territory,
was
Martin.
It? Oh,
completely unacceptable for the just a minute section.
Okay,
Jonathan, sorry. I mean, I don't think you'll struggle to do less than a minute on this one. West Brom v Palace. Oh no, sorry, it's not you. You've got Chelsea v Leeds, Jonathan. You might want longer than a minute for that one, to be fair.
No, if you want a minute, you're getting a minute. Yeah, I think this. Yeah, we've seen Chelsea have since the Southampton game have tightened up hugely at the back, only letting 2 goals in 9 games. But those games have fallen into sort of 2 very distinct categories. So there's games against weaker sides where you'd expect them to be dominant, and then there's games against good sides where they've been quite content to sit off. So you think of a home game against Sevilla, you think of the away game at United, and you think of a game against Tottenham last week. The game against Leeds falls in the middle. It's obviously Lampard v Bielsa that who've had history already, despite Bielsa only having been here for 3 years and Lampard only having had his 3rd season. So I think there's a huge test of Chelsea's approach. That Leeds have been at their best against teams who sit deep. Have been at their worst against teams who sit deep against them. They need space behind the opposition to attack. Chelsea probably will offer that. So I think tactically for Lampard, this is a huge, huge test.
Very, very good. Martin, over to you now. West Brom v Palace. You've had a warning, so I'm going to be a bit...
I need to talk much faster. Yeah. Okay, so I think obviously the big news ahead of this game is whether Will Zahar returns for Palace. Obviously, he's been suffering with COVID. They've lost both games that he's missed, and they've now lost 16 of the last 20 matches that Zahar's not started in the league. So his comeback would be particularly timely, having scored in 2 of his last 3 meetings against West Brom. West Brom, by comparison, have failed to score a single goal in their last 4 meetings with Palace, but they will be buoyed after their first win of the season. Match winner Conor Gallagher looks really impressive in and out of possession, while Mateus Pereira created 9 chances against Sheffield United, which is a season high this season for a single game. I think his battle with Eberechi Eze on that flank will be really, really an exciting point in an otherwise what could be a drab game. Those 2 players ranked 2nd and 3rd respectively in our championship ratings last season. So individual quality could be key in this match between 2 teams that otherwise it could be a fragmented game. They both actually rank among the 2 of the most fouled teams in the Premier League this season. So it could be a bit feisty, an important game for both teams.
Oh, just in a minute, I've put the frighteners on you. Right. Really good refereeing from me, I will say. Jonathan, Sheffield United v Leicester, off you go.
Well, I think this is it for Sheffield United. If they don't win this, then they're relegated. They take 1 point in 10 games. Really struggled to score goals. 10 games a season, they've scored 1 in 5 of them and none in the other 5. But the last 2 games, they actually played pretty well. And certainly against West Brom, bewildering that they didn't win that game. I think their XG was over 3, and yet they lose the game 1-0. So they're not playing badly, they're just not scoring goals. It's a bit of a funny team season. No draws, they've won 5, lost 4. So although they're still 4th in the table, there are question marks there. I think Jamie Vardy's form is as weak as it's been probably in 3 or 4 years. He's struggling for goals. So I think this Leicester are vulnerable. A lot of injuries in Ndidi, Castagna, Pereira, Soyuncu. So this is a chance for Sheffield United, and they have to take it if they are to have any hope. of setting up this season.
Yeah, arguably Jamie Vardy's struggling for fitness a little bit from what I've seen of him as well. Martin, to finish with you, Liverpool v Wolves.
So all eyes will be on Diogo Jota against his former club, but while Wolves have actually coped pretty well with his sort of departure, covering for the loss of Raul Jimenez will now be a massive, massive problem. Fabio Silva's the only real like-for-like replacement, but he's understandably needs time. He's only a teenager. He's struggled a little bit to now. So it'll be interesting to see if Nuno sticks with this sort of tactical flexibility that he's shown of late and goes for a front three with maybe not a focal point. Pedro Neto stepped into the shoes of Jota superbly. Podence and Traore helped form an exciting attacking triumvirate. So it's a case of whether they now play as a three or behind a lone striker. So that'll be the selection dilemma for them. And also the fact, do they stick with the back four? Conor Cody did start in a back four for the first time at centre-back in a back four in his Wolves career at Arsenal. So it'll be interesting to see what they do against Liverpool, obviously against his boyhood club. Liverpool relied on their academy players in midweek. So again, more interesting selection dilemmas for Klopp. Does he keep faith in the likes of Curtis Jones and Nico Williams? I think Alexander-Arnold is coming back to fitness. Quimine Kelleher, played excellently, obviously, and I think he's due another start with Alisson out. While Nat Phillips could also come back, so that you could potentially see 4 academy graduates lining up for Liverpool, given that between all 4 of them, they'd only started 4 league games between them last season.
Good stuff. Well done, Martin. And your final one, Jonathan, it's Brighton v Southampton.
I think one of the great things about the Premier League this season has been so many of those sort of middling teams you wouldn't necessarily sort of rush to watch, are actually quite interesting. And I think these are 2 of them. I think Southampton and Hasenhüttl are really good to watch here. They press in a very interesting way. And I think Graham Potter's Brighton do something similar. And Brighton, I sort of feel that they keep playing well and not quite getting the results. So even though it was a controversial penalty that got them a point against Liverpool last week, they probably deserved it on the balance of the game. They get a lot of absentees, Tatlably suspended. Mopé is out with a thigh problem. Lallana's out with a hip or groin problem. No Proper, no Andone, no McAllister. So that's a big test for them. But then Southampton without Ings and Redmond, which perhaps negates their attacking threat. They have scored in every game since the opening game of the season. And of course, they do have James Ward-Prowse. So a low 2 sort of middle-ish side, I think, tactically be a very interesting game of two high-pressing teams.
Well done, gentlemen. Very well done. As I said last week, I do not envy that task at all. And now as a little add-on to that segment, we've got something called the long shot, where we will pick out the game where we think there is most likely to be an upset and why. I'll start with you, Martin.
I've actually changed my mind on this a few times. I'm going to go with Sheffield United. Having tipped Leicester as my most impressive team of the season, it's all gone wheels off for them. But I just think, like Jonathan said, this is just, well, every game now is massive for Sheffield United, but they have improved quite a lot over the last 2 games. To the extent, a lot of this is from the West Brom game, but to the extent that they've now created more clear-cut chances than Man City and Chelsea this season, and they've scored 4 or 5 goals. From that tally, so they are creating chances, and they will look to that as a positive, and so they should. There's issues at the other end, but you still don't see them conceding a lot of goals. So I think they could get a result here, whether that's a win or a draw. Either way would probably be an upset given their form. So I'm going to go with Sheffield United.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean that's what I would have said, but now that's been stolen from me cruelly. I mean, which is crueler? West Brom beating Sheffield United last week, or Martin nicking that off me today? So I'll say Burnley to beat Everton. I think Everton, without their 2 first-choice fullbacks, are vulnerable. I think Burnley, they again, there's a sense that they need to win. The things are starting to get desperate. And I think they have been a little bit better the last 2 or 3 weeks after a pretty miserable start. So, especially with Nick Pope coming back, I know that Cork and Brady are both out, which obviously affects their midfield and creativity. But given Everton's absence, given the issues that James causes them as much as the opposition, I think maybe Burnley to nick something there.
You know what? I'm going to go big for the first time we've done this. I'm going to go Wolves to cause an upset at Liverpool. that front three's got me thinking on the break with the trickery and the raw pace of Traore. I've got a feeling Wolves could nick something at Anfield. I don't know what your two thoughts are on that.
It was one of my sort of potentials. Yeah, I think there's definitely a potential for it. I think predicting Wolves to cause an upset in a big game isn't that much of an upset anymore, because they do always perform in those games. So I think there's certainly a case that they could easily nick a point. Whether they'll win, I'm not sure, but I'm not sure that Sheffield United will win either, to be fair. So I think this is an interesting set of games, because I think there's quite a few where it could go with the sort of underdog, as it were, to at least get a point. So yeah, I'm not adverse to it.
And Jonathan, I mean, whenever I say anything now, I look at your face and try and read you. You gave me a big poker face there when I said that.
I think I just don't quite trust Liverpool at the moment, and Wolves clearly a good side, and in their time in the Premier League have been better against better sides. But I think Klopp's reaction to the draw last week, that spikiness suggests he feels a bit of pressure. I know they beat Ajax midweek, but they weren't great in that game, and they won it comfortably enough in the end. But Ajax had chances. I know, Kevin Kelleher played very well, but he's not Alisson, and they do have a lot of absentees. So yeah, that's, and you do sort of think. I mean, this is a daft thing, I guess, but when a team's gone 64 games unbeaten at home, they're kind of due one, right?
yeah.
And also
pure maths.
Lest we forget that in 1947, Liverpool won away at Wolves to win the title, and the winning goal, Stan Cullis, the Wolves centre half, could have pulled down the Liverpool centre forward, whose name will come back to me. It's a bloke who's on the Sgt. Pepper cover. What's his name? I
haven't got a clue.
You know the Liverpool player who's on the Sgt. Pepper cover?
I don't, unfortunately.
They signed him. They signed him. Stubbins, Albert Stubbins.
Mm-hmm.
Stan Cullis had the chance to pull down Stubbins and didn't, because he said, I wouldn't want to win a championship in that way. So Wolves are due payback from that. They've been due it for 73 years. And given that coincides with Liverpool being due a home defeat, this is absolutely nailed on a Wolves victory.
We now move on to the Who Scored form rankings in association with Footstock, and I'm going to cross to our Footstock correspondent, Martin, to tell us more.
So Footstock is a really fun platform where it's essentially a cross between player card trading, like you would have done when you were a kid, swapping cards and stuff like that, but this time for real money, so you probably didn't do that when you were a kid. And a mixture of that and fantasy football contests. So you build your portfolio of players, you buy them in real time based on how rare they are in the game. So when you were a child, you always had 60 Andy Todds. You might have 60 of a one-star player this time, but you build your portfolio of players and then you enter those players into fantasy football tournaments for real money. So very, very unique and very good fun.
So in at 10, we've got Adamola Luckman, 7.34 is his rating. I've got no idea why I sounded like I was on top of the pops there, but we'll continue. James Rodriguez in 9th with 7.35. De Bruyne in 8th with 7.36. 7th, Pedro Neto with 7.42. Now, Jonathan, he's a very, very nice player, isn't he, Pedro Neto?
Yeah, and I think Wolves sort of, I mean, they needed him anyway with Shota going, but they desperately need him now with Raul Jimenez likely to be out for a long time. So yeah, they Wolves are very good at signing young Portuguese players. We know that. We know the reasons for that, and he's another one of them.
Good player. 6th is Dominic Calvert-Lewin, 7.42. 5th, whose name, even just looking at him now, is annoying me because my best mate put him in his fancy team randomly last week and he scored a hat-trick. It's Riyad Mahrez with 7.63. Harry Kane at 4 with 7.64. James Ward-Prowse 3rd, 7.81. And Martin, his free kicks just continue to be absolutely amazing. Yeah,
they're unreal. Just so good. I think, I don't know, like I can't scour the entire world, but you'd have to put him up there as one of the best set piece takers in the world, and certainly from direct free kicks, he's just nailed on sort of postage stamp. As soon as it is, I mean, it's cliche, but it is like giving away a penalty that close to the edge of the box, and the fact that he can do it from a little bit further out, but really tight to the edge of the box, like he did against Villa, to get that up and over, incredible. So his ability over those is remarkable. It's something that I thought was sort of overplayed early on in his career, because he's obviously been good at it for his entire career. But I didn't really see what else he offered. But he's playing very, very well in general now. And I think he's another one who'll be not nailed on for the Euros, but he's got a very, very good chance just because of that ability over set pieces. And set pieces can be really important in tournament football. The downside for Southampton is I think they've actually had the fewest corners in the Premier League this season. So they don't actually have that much chance to make the most of it. But when they do get a corner, they're a big threat. And obviously they scored from one against Manchester United, and it's all about the delivery. So he's been outstanding. Hold
that thought with the set pieces in England. We've got Bruno Fernandes in second with 7.84. And at the top of the pile, it's Aston Villa's Jack Grealish with 7.96. Now, Jonathan, off the back of what Martin's just said about the set pieces in England, surely those two in tandem, you've got Jack Grealish, the most fouled player in world football, and James Ward-Prowse with his dead ball ability. Surely that's a no-brainer for England.
Yeah, I mean, the problem that England managers always have is they're only allowed to pick 11 players.
Yeah, that is a problem.
Grealish has been brilliant this season, and it's really good to see how a player who we knew was good, who was criticised certainly by Graham Souness last season, and Graham Souness saying the reason he was fouled so much was he held on the ball too long, which I think was just sort of to slightly ignore the context of how Villa played and the players around him. And now that Villa have made a handful of good signings over the summer, particularly I think from Grealish's point of view, Barkley has been has helped share that creative burden in midfield, although obviously injured now. We're seeing him really blossom. From an England point of view, the danger is his golden period of form maybe has come too early, and will he be able to sustain that into June?
Yep, very, very true. Martin, we come to you now to mention the Twitter Advent Calendar giveaway. I'm hoping you know what that is, because, to be honest, I don't.
So, yeah, all throughout December, we're basically giving away prizes, one every day to followers. It's a simple retweet and follow competition each day. Some excellent prizes. The first day, we gave away a 50-inch Samsung 4K TV, so not bad. Yesterday, we gave away a pair of sort of £250 Nike boots. So some good prizes gone out already, but I can assure you some very, very good ones coming throughout the month. So just keep an eye on WhoScored socials at WhoScored on Twitter.
Yeah, there's some very good prizes that you've mentioned there. Interested to see what's coming if they're not even the best things. Jonathan, just like last week, we're going to finish with you with the trivia. So have you got an answer to the question we posed at the start? Two of the players that started the last time Chelsea and Leeds met in 2004 are still playing in the Premier League today. Who are they?
James Milner?
Yeah, that was the one I got. I haven't got a clue on the next one.
Then, well, from what Martin said, sort of umming and ahhing about whether he's actually playing, is it a third choice goalkeeper?
It is.
Is it Scott Carson?
It is Scott Carson.
Oh, that's incredible.
Redemption for Jonathan the last week. But yeah, Scott Carson, so he started for Leeds that day. And now, yeah, obviously playing a massive role for Man City. So, yeah.
Well done, Jonathan.
Very good.
Do it. I'm going to say that's 1-1 between, because you're posing the questions, Martin. Jonathan's guessing. I'm going to say it's 1-1.
I've got quite a big say in these scoreboards.
yeah. To be fair, next week you could just make it as hard as possible. Now,
yeah. I mean, I did get Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank on the rebound last week. To be fair,
you did. That was a very good answer. That's very good answer.
I'm gonna implement some of my harsh refereeing to you, Jonathan, for this segment. I'm gonna go 1-1. It's a good segment though. I'm enjoying it, and I've enjoyed the podcast with you both. Thanks so much for joining me. We'll be back next week. If you are watching this video via YouTube, then make sure you're subscribing, liking, and commenting. And yeah, thanks for listening. Tune in next week.